Greetings, salutations and welcome. So I was inspired to make this little video following a recent conversation with a friend of mine. Now I don't know if anyone else is ever going to wind up watching this video, but should you find yourself watching it one day, and if you like it, it would really mean a lot to me if you could leave a little comment, maybe like it or subscribe even to the channel and maybe share it with friends. Now I know every YouTuber and their fucking dog says like, share and subscribe. But I'm not some huge YouTuber with 500,000 subscribers already. I'm not trying to up my prominence. I don't have a channel. I'm doing this as an amateur. And quite simply, if I got a bit of feedback and people like it, then it would certainly give me the motivation, encouragement to go and try and make one or two more little videos like this. So like I say, if you find yourself watching this and if you like it, please take the time to give me some feedback. So, as I said, I was inspired to make this video following a recent conversation with a friend of mine, during which he basically told me that if I wanted to know the truth about the leftists and the SJEWS, then I really needed to listen to people like Ben Shapiro, or Sargon of Akkad, or Milo, or Tommy Robinson, and these kind of like online personalities. Now this got me to thinking a little bit about, because I'm already familiar with quite a few of these people. I like to try and keep up with a lot of the sort of political stuff that's going on online. And it got me to thinking about something that I have seen coming from multiple, I'm not going to put any kind of like political categorization except to say anti-SJWs, anti-liberals, a trend that I find is really quite worrying, and I see in a lot of videos and a lot of commentary coming from quite a lot of the people he mentioned. Now in this video, I must admit, I haven't actually chosen to focus on Ben Shapiro or Sargon. I actually picked another YouTuber called Teal Deer. Now the reason I chose this YouTuber, or more to the point, the reason I chose this video, is I feel that it really epitomizes the issue or problem that I actually wanted to highlight. And I feel that even the most sort of like, politically aligned with Teal Deer, or even his sort of like hardcore fans, once they actually think about this and think about what I'm saying, I believe that they won't actually disagree with the underlying point I'm making here. I feel that they really would have like tremendous trouble like dismissing out of hand the point I'm making, because I think it's undeniable. Anyone who's going to sit down and like think about this for more than 2 seconds cannot really fail to agree with the basic point that I'm trying to highlight here. So what is the video we're actually going to look at? Well, it's a video by, like I said, a YouTuber named Teal Deer, and it's called Why the Term SJEWS. In this video, YouTuber Teal Deer basically is looking at another YouTuber called hbomberguy. In the course of one of his videos, hbomberguy used the term SJEW, S-Jew, I believe. And basically Teal Deer is talking about this in his video and giving his perspective, point of view on why hbomberguy used this term and what he means by it and what this says about the left in general, I guess, to sort of like give a basic summary. So I'm going to start off by playing one sort of longish clip from Teal Deer's video, which is really going to sort of set the scene, and basically it's going to encompass his entire argument basically in this one clip. After that I might play one or two shorter clips later on to sort of highlight certain things, but basically it's going to be me responding to his underlying point, which he makes quite clear at the start. That's another reason I picked this video, in as much as really Teal Deer's argument is not that complicated, it's not that sort of, in-depth or anything, so it's a very simple little nugget of information or a little nugget of an idea that we've got to sort of like look at and deconstruct here and talk about. So that was the other reason for choosing this video, that it wasn't going to sort of overcomplicate the point I wanted to make. So without further ado, I'll let Teal Deer get on and explain to the world why he believes hbomberguy uses the term SJEW.
And they also mentioned that the person in that video that they first heard this phrase SJEW from was hbomberguy. You know, that guy who pretends to be poor by shooting all of his videos in his garage and spends his time prancing around in a Sonic the Hedgehog costume. Because, that's normal and not in any way cringe-inducing. So it would seem to be that the first instance that most people have heard this term SJEW is from this clip.
If SJEWS are bad because they spend too much time whining and don't talk about real problems, then why aren't you talking about those problems instead of just whining about the other people over and over and over for literally years?
So while this may not be the very first utterance of the phrase, it does seem to be a lot of people's first exposure to the phrase. So what is hbomberguy's reason for using the phrase SJEW? Well, very conveniently, someone asked him on his Ask FM page, and he provided his reasoning, which is apparently as follows. Question: why do you say SJEWS? Answer: to remind people that this isn't the first time a bunch of weirdos have invented a vague group of bad people they then have to stop. So clearly he's thinking back to a time when Jewish people were maligned by another group, and that other group of people were determined to stop the Jews. And given the fact that various social justice, feminist, and other leftist organizations, given that one of their current tactics is to call literally anyone who disagrees with them a fascist or a Nazi, I think that it's not a massive leap of logic to suggest that he is connecting the two. Indeed, reading some of the answers in Noel's comment section, quite a lot of other people have made this connection as well. And I do think that one particular comment here really hits the nail on the head, when they say that this is victimocracy at its finest. Quote, "We're hated by modern Nazis like Jews were hated by World War II Nazis," end quote. And I do believe that that is quite a large part of the explanation, if not the entire explanation, for the use of the term SJEW. That they are some sort of oppressed minority, despite of course the overwhelming hold that their worldview has in things like the court system and academia, but because they genuinely believe that they live in a white supremacist Nazi society, and this white supremacist Nazi society that we supposedly live in disagrees with their worldview, that makes them the equivalent of Jewish people within the Nazi Reich.
So, there you have it. That is basically the entire thrust of TLD's argument. He believes that hbomberguy and maybe liberals like hbomberguy use the term SJEW because they feel that they are as persecuted as the Jews were under the Nazi regime. Let's be clear about that. I'm going to have to say it again. hbomberguy, middle class, moderately educated Englishman, genuinely believes himself to be as persecuted as the Jews were under the Nazi regime. Now, I guess in order to start this discussion, we're probably going to have to maybe ask ourselves in what way hbomberguy is persecuted at all. At least, in TLD's mind, what kind of persecution he must be suffering in order to justify this claim. Now, I don't know anything about hbomberguy's lifestyle from what I've seen of his videos. I mean, he's obviously a white, young English male. He seems to live in a fairly sort of middle-class suburban house. So I'm guessing that basically in his everyday outdoors real life, he suffers pretty much little to no persecution whatsoever. I'm obviously also English. I have lived in England for a long time. I don't really suffer any persecution in my daily life. Probably the closest I'll get to being persecuted is strolling into the wrong bar in a town I don't know and being told to go fuck myself kind of thing. So I am going to assume that basically the only persecution that hbomberguy could possibly be the recipient of happens in his online life. And given that, TLD is a YouTuber, hbomberguy is a YouTuber, this is an online community, this is where this discussion happens, I think that's probably also what TLD is referring to as well. So we're talking about basically online persecution, which, what does that amount to? Some mean, unkind comments in a YouTube section, maybe a few spam, unkind comments on Twitter. That's about it, really. So, yeah, we've got a scenario where TLD is suggesting that hbomberguy is comparing receiving some mean comments online to the kind of persecution that the Jews suffered under the Nazi regime during the Second World War and before. Now, I don't know about you, but to me this kind of sounds pretty ridiculous. The idea that, a modern person with a modern education and understanding of what happened during World War II and the Jewish persecution would actually go around making an equivalence and saying, yes, I suffer as much as the Jews did because some people were mean to me on Twitter. I mean, does it really sound plausible that an adult is going to behave like that? Even if you don't like their policies, even if you don't like liberalism and you don't like socialist ideas or whatever hbomberguy's political stance is, do you really think that he's going to go around saying, yes, people were mean to me on Twitter and that means I am suffering just as bad as the Jews are? I mean, come on. I mean, let's try and give another example that's out of the context of the political spectrum. Imagine Teal Deer went out with his family or his girlfriend or his boyfriend, maybe, I don't know, boating on a lake, on a little sort of like, boating lake for the afternoon. And imagine he hired a boat and it had a leak in it. And water started coming into the boat, so they had to row quickly back to shore. And then I went around saying about Teal Deer, oh yeah, well, do you know that he actually really believes that he suffered just like the people on the Titanic did, and he knows exactly how the people on the Titanic feel now? Would you believe me if I said that about him? Because that's the kind of level that we're talking about here. That's the kind of separation there is between the experience of like having a few mean comments online and the experience of being persecuted by the fucking Nazis, for Christ's sake. Now, maybe one or two people are going to be tempted at this point to say, yeah, but Teal Deer didn't mean this literally. He wasn't saying that hbomberguy is making this literal comparison, saying he suffers like he does under the Nazis. What he's saying is the choice of this term shows a persecution complex. The fact that you would choose to use this term at all shows that you have the mentality of a victim. He's not saying he literally believes that to be true. Well, if that's your counter-argument, then I invite you to listen to what Teal Deer says next in his video.
Despite the fact, of course, that there is no parallel whatsoever between the two. These people are still legally allowed to own property. They haven't been forced out of their jobs or their homes by the government. They're not required to wear in public any sort of symbol or sign that denotes what they are. There's no state agreements attempting to encourage them to leave the country. And perhaps most obviously, they're not being rounded up, forced into camps, or executed for their mere existence.
So I think that pretty much clears up any doubt here. Teal Deer means this literally. He is saying hbomberguy literally feels that he is as persecuted as the Jews were under the Nazi regime, because he receives maybe a few mean comments on YouTube and Twitter, and people who are anti-SJW or don't like his politics aren't polite to him. He is going to go around telling people that he is just like a Jew, that he suffers as much as the Jews. When he goes back to his parents, goes to see his mum for Sunday dinner or to get his washing done, he's sitting around the dinner table and he's saying, yeah, mum, somebody left me mean comments. God, I know how the Jews felt now. I mean, come on, this is an absolutely ridiculous hypothesis to put forward. Now, if Teal Deer were here, he might well interject and say, yeah, but that's the point. These people are ridiculous. These people are crazy. These people are this unhinged. But I would say, hang on a moment. Just hang on, Teal Deer. Just 1 second. Because for the moment, we haven't got one shred of actual proof from hbomberguy or any other liberal that this is why they use the term. The only person who has claimed this is the reason they're using the term is you. So we have one of two possibilities here. Either these people really are as ludicrous and ridiculous and as unhinged and disconnected from reality as you're claiming they are, or you're just making up a ridiculous, unfounded, and quite frankly stupid story about them in order to discredit them and make them look as stupid as possible in the eyes of as many people as you can. But let's play Teal Deer's game a little further. Let's have a look at what hbomberguy actually said about this term and see if we can come up with a slightly more plausible explanation for its meaning than the one that Teal Deer came up with. Now, I will admit that I am taking Teal Deer at his word on this. I haven't personally been and independently checked what hbomberguy actually said about this subject and what he said about the term SJEW. I'm simply proceeding on the assumption that if Teal Deer were to have actually fabricated something, he would have done it in a way that didn't make his subsequent arguments look quite so implausible and quite so silly. So I'm assuming that this is actually what hbomberguy said about the term SJEW and his reasons for using it. So just for the sake of being pedantic, let's break this down very simply. We have the term SJEW, which is drawing a parallel between social justice warriors or liberals, or call them what you will, and Jews. So that's the first bit of information we have. So then hbomberguy goes on to refer to a group he calls a bunch of weirdos. Now, let's assume that this is not his own group he's referring to. One would assume not. So now we have a second group in our little diagram here. We have the group of the Jews, which are the SJEWS, and now we have a second group, which are a bunch of weirdos. And what hbomberguy then goes on to say is that this bunch of weirdos invented a vague group of bad people they had to stop. So what is quite clear here is that this is referring to the actions of this second group. We're not talking about the experience of the first group, we're not talking about the experience of being persecuted, we're talking about the actions of this second group, the group of weirdos, who are obviously, in this particular analogy, the Nazis. So, what did the Nazis do? They invented a vague group of bad people they had to stop. Now, anyone who has the slightest understanding or basic education about the Nazi regime and the persecution of the Jews will be familiar with the huge amount of anti-Jewish propaganda that existed in the German media under the Nazi regime. There were pamphlets, there were films, there were newspaper articles. There was all sorts of stuff that basically painted the Jews as the enemy of the German people. They were rats and they were responsible for all of society's ills. They were made the scapegoat for many, if not all, of Germany's problems. So it would seem quite painfully clear to me that if hbomberguy uses the term SJEW, he's not doing it because he feels that he is as persecuted as the Jews were under Nazis. He uses the term because just like the Nazis went around telling everyone that the Jews were the enemies of the people and were evil and would destroy society, now a whole group of other people are going around saying that social justice warriors are the enemy of the people and that they're evil and they're going to destroy and undermine society. And this is of course where we come to irony, sweet irony. Teal Deer. What is Teal Deer doing in his video? He is proposing a totally unfounded and quite ridiculous hypothesis with the sole intention of trying to make liberals and SJWs look as ridiculous as possible. He is literally 100% conforming to the behaviour that hbomberguy is describing when he uses the term SJEW. And what's amazing is he doesn't even seem to realise this. He doesn't seem to see the irony in making a video like this about this subject. Now, I don't know anything very much about Teal Deer at all. There is, in my opinion, much too much of a tendency for people just to dismiss anyone who doesn't agree with them or has different views as being stupid. I don't know. I am not going to assume that Teal Deer is stupid at all. Maybe he just thinks his audience is stupid. I don't know. But although I'm not casting any aspersions upon his intelligence, the argument that he is putting forward here as to why hbomberguy and liberals who use this term do use this term is a stupid argument. And I think anyone, even his diehard fans and people who agree with him, if you're going to think about this just for 2 minutes, or not even that long, just think about it rather than reacting to it emotionally, and you'll see that what he is advancing is a completely and utterly implausible scenario. People just don't behave like this. Real people in the real world don't behave like this. Yes, if you can turn everyone that you disagree with into a cartoon caricature online, it is then easy to believe that they will behave like this. But actually go out in the real world and find a real person and try and see if they're going to compare themselves to the Jews because they're insulted on Twitter. It's just not going to happen, guys. And I would really like to believe that most sane, rational people who are prepared to think about this for, any length of time at all, no matter what their political views, even if you're completely anti-liberal, even if you hate hbomberguy and you hate his political views, I would still hope that you can see that what Teal Deer is proposing here is completely ludicrous and unrealistic. People just do not behave like this. And this, I think, is a problem that really needs to be addressed, because Teal Deer isn't the only one I've seen doing this, and this is where this relates back to Ben Shapiro and Sargon of Akkad and all of these other people. Even Sargon engages in this kind of behaviour quite regularly, where rather than just commenting on a particular subject or giving his opinion about something or giving a counter-argument to one specific thing, he will then extrapolate his conclusions and apply it to all liberals and all SJWs or all of the left. Oh, this shows a group of people that are completely unhinged. I mean, I've seen him do it. I've seen him read an article that was written by one person and then use that one person's opinion in that one article to then extrapolate and say, oh, well, this is what all liberals are like, or this is what all SJWs are like, or this is what all the left are like. And this kind of argument is not only, in my opinion, intellectually lazy because it allows you to draw a lot of false moral equivalences between people who aren't necessarily affiliated in any way at all, but it's also, in my opinion, really, really dangerous because rather than engaging with ideas or issues, you end up simply turning the opposition or anyone who may disagree with you into a generic caricature worthy of nothing but contempt. You stop engaging with human beings and their ideas at an intellectual level and instead reduce any and all outsiders to nothing but cartoon villains which can be dismissed out of hand. Nowadays it seems that anyone who vaguely identifies as being a Democrat will get written off as being a leftist liberal SJW, and that obviously constitutes millions upon millions of people of all ages, colours, genders, social classes and so on. They are not one single hive mind mass who all think alike, agree on everything, and all march to the beat of a single drum with the goal of bringing the downfall of Western civilization. The left are just regular people, human beings. They all have different opinions, different political stances, and like all people, they disagree on a lot. Sure, some of them are more radical or extreme in their views, but the overwhelming majority are still fairly moderate, and they don't want to bring down or radically alter Western democracies. By constantly talking about the leftist liberal SJWs as if they are a single amorphous black mass with pointed fangs who, out of pure bloody-minded misanthropy, want to suck the life from society and see everyone in misery and suffering, you are dehumanizing them, turning them into a caricature. Once you start adopting that kind of viewpoint and believing it to be true, you completely stop interacting on a productive or even human level. You no longer have to debate, you no longer have to take seriously, you no longer have to listen, and you no longer have to consider the opinions valid or even worthy of consideration. It provides a psychological mechanism, a crutch, through which you can easily dismiss and ignore anyone who may have different ideas to yours. I genuinely wonder if the likes of Teal'c, Sagan, Shapiro and so on have been so exposed to and engaging in this kind of scapegoating and caricaturing for so long now that they have started to believe it, and have maybe stopped even noticing or realizing what they're actually doing. This is the only explanation I can think of for why Teal'c can put forward such a ludicrous hypothesis as the one seen in the video, without either himself or his followers stopping to think for 1 second and realizing that maybe it's unlikely to be true when describing real people in real life. Teal'c himself pointed out how some of his viewers were ready to believe without question this claim, this absurd idea that hbomberguy and SJWs really believe their experience of people being mean to them online is comparable to Nazi Jewish persecution, and without the slightest actual direct proof that this is actually even the case. It's like they were already primed and ready to lap up any "look how stupid the libtards are" story without the slightest question or resistance, so long as it played into the already established caricature of loony liberals. And when you are basing your judgment of how real people will behave in the real world on a repeatedly stereotyped and absurd miscaricature, there we have strayed into some extremely dangerous territory. It's like people are approaching their understanding, behaviour and attitudes towards others in the political spectrum as if they were dealing with fucking Skeletor. Now, as I am choosing to criticise certain anti-liberal, anti-SJW personalities, I am sure the overwhelming majority of people who never watched this video will already have written me off as being an SJW liberal myself, as we seem to have created an environment where most people believe you can only be with us or against us. And as I am not defending Teal'c, Sargon and so on in everything they say and do, then I must be a radical SJW myself. Now if you're smart, you really shouldn't need me to explain why that is a massive problem and very dangerous to freedom of thought, forcing all of us, conservative, liberal, right, left or other, to be reduced to the lowest and stupidest common denominator. It's a dynamic that forces us to engage with politics and political debate like retarded children rather than rational adults, Red lorry, blue lorry, thing good, thing bad. If the likes of Sargon or Shapiro care at all about intelligence, intelligent debate and rationality, then they really should be promoting the idea that there is a rich and deep diversity of thought within our society on both left and right, not the opposite where they seem to be trying to portray any ideas which are not their own as being the insane ramblings of a hive-minded horde. Surely political debate should be about sharing ideas and viewpoints and learning from each other in order to find the best solutions for everyone for society's problems. Surely it shouldn't be about assuming that we as individuals already know everything it's possible to know and already possess all the correct answers, meaning the only remaining goal is to simply win every argument for your side at any cost and by any means. Because very often it feels the latter is where we're at right now. Now this is where any die-hard defenders or holdouts will probably bring up the final "what about" argument. What about the left then? Aren't they also lumping together the right into a single group, calling them all racists or all fascists? Well, I would have multiple replies to this. The first is that I am not identifying the people who are spreading SJW anti-liberal fear-mongering as conservative or right-wing. I am simply identifying those who engage in this behaviour. So to try and make me out to be a hypocrite because there also exist liberals who do this is invalid because I'm not taking the position of defending the left and condemning the right. Secondly, whataboutism, the moral equivalence argument, is not a defence or justification for anything. Two wrongs don't make a right. People often throw out the what about argument as if somehow that is the end of the discussion and there's nothing else to talk about. That's completely wrong. If anything, it's the start of the discussion in which we should address bias on both sides if necessary, not just use as an excuse to abandon all moral principles and move on. And finally, I would say yes, I do agree that sometimes liberals or leftists do tend to do the same thing and generalise too much about the right, conflating or lumping together people who don't necessarily share the same views. Some may even argue that hbomberguy has been guilty of this in his videos where he looked at the golden one etc. and then made generalisations about the right or the manosphere or conservatives. However, I think it's also fair to say that this kind of caricaturing or stereotyping is considerably more common and more pronounced amongst the anti-left, anti-liberal SJW crowd than it is amongst liberal pundits themselves. I see much more hysterical, pearl-clutching rhetoric concerning SJWs wanting to destroy civilization with cultural Marxist conspiracies than I do in the other direction. If you need more evidence that this is true, then I would simply ask you to look at the huge lexicon which has evolved over recent years explicitly for caricaturing, insulting and denigrating the left. SJW, social justice warrior, is a perfect example, and is of course one of those derogatory terms, but we also have things like snowflake, beta, soy boy, spengler, feminazi, so on and so on. All of these terms exist explicitly to stereotype liberals and turn them into caricatures, dehumanize strawmen to be mocked, reviled and dismissed. The mere existence of this vocabulary and the enthusiasm and frequency with which many people use it to mock, discredit or dismiss the left should be proof in itself that this kind of scapegoating and fearmonger is a genuine problem which needs addressing. You may wish to try and write this off as either trolling or joking, but it's quite clear that many go beyond that and incorporate this kind of thinking into their serious political convictions, arguments and views. Conversely, liberals have not evolved an entirely new vocabulary with which they mock and dismiss those on the right of the political spectrum, which would tend to suggest that they do not engage as frequently or as passionately in the same kind of stereotyping of the right. So sure, this happens on both sides to a certain extent, which doesn't justify it on either side. And yes, I would be just as critical of liberal pundits who engage in the same kind of reductionist narratives. But the fact that I have to phrase it like that at all by saying both sides illustrates a massive part of the problem. By choosing to define our political spectrum and identities in terms of left and right and subsequently Republican or Democrat, we have created an unavoidable dichotomy of political thought where quite simply you're us or them, with us or against us. Nowadays, anyone who speaks their opinions will immediately be labelled as belonging to one camp or the other, and for many that labelling will dictate all subsequent behaviour and reaction, whether we listen to them and take them seriously or simply dismiss them for being shills. Now to be fair, it's not the fault of Sargon or Ben Shapiro or even Teal Deer that our socio-political identities evolved around this left-right spectrum or divide. However, when they rant about leftist liberal SJWs, these people are actively fanning the flames and reinforcing an incredibly reductionist and simplistic approach to political thought and debate. Effectively, they are encouraging us to play politics in baby mode, where everything is oversimplified, everything is made incredibly easy, and where nobody has to work or think very hard about anything. In political baby mode, you don't have to challenge yourself or think about difficult questions. You don't have to take the time and effort to learn new information and understand complex issues. You can simply swallow the "all the liberals are evil" invincibility power-up and coast through to the end of the level with your eyes closed. So, if you're against an easy mode in Dark Souls, if you were outraged at Star Fox for having a baby invincibility option, if you were disgusted by reporters modding Sekiro to make it easier, if you are that passionately against easy modes in something so relatively trivial as video games, why on earth would you choose that mode for yourself when it comes to something as serious as politics, which determines the fate of our society? Maybe you should start concentrating on getting good at political debate.